Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get you the core insight. Today, we're looking at something quite unique, an extensive interview transcript with Israeli politician Gali Gotliv. Our mission to really unpack her distinctive, often provocative takes on everything from military strategy to the court. We want to pull out the most significant, maybe even surprising nugget.
Exactly. And this is valuable because it's a direct window, really, into the thinking of a Likud member of Knesset. You get her arguments, the nuances, straight from the source.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Where should we start? Maybe her views on military and political strategy. She seems quite critical of some internal government dynamics.
Yeah, she definitely is. She talks quite a bit about Minister Smotrich and his role, specifically insisting on overseeing the civil administration in Judea and Samaria. And what she finds striking, or rather calls it the shame of shame, is that under his watch, even during wartime, outpost evacuations actually increased.
During wartime.
That's her claim. She also points to what she sees as, inconsistency on aid money, saying one thing publicly, but then voting against it.
Okay. That's a significant internal critique. Now, shifting to maybe the bigger picture, the war aims. This is where I think it gets particularly interesting. She draws a very sharp line between conquest and annexation for northern Gaza.
She does, and it's a critical distinction for her. See, conquest, in her view, is temporary. It's a military reality that, could potentially be reversed in agreements, maybe traded for hostages, for example.
Okay, sure.
But annexation, that's totally different. It's permanent. It's meant as a, quote, punishment for Hamas. She argues this is the only language Hamas understands, the only way to really shatter their what she calls their victory consciousness. So it's a very maximalist position.
It really is. And that maximalist approach seems to extend to holding Hamas leaders accountable, even those outside Gaza, like in Qatar. What's her specific demand there?
Oh, she's incredibly direct. She calls on President Trump specifically to authorize either the extradition or, the elimination of Hamas leaders residing in Qatar.
Elimination.
Yeah. She labels Qatar an enemy state, says it supports terror, and argues, look, Qatar needs the U.S. far more than the U.S. needs Qatar, especially, with Saudi Arabia now competing for U.S. investment.
That's quite a stance. And sticking with the money, what about the funds flowing into Gaza? Does she comment?
She does. She brings up former Chief of Staff Eisenkot, alleging he approved Qatari funds going to Hamas. But importantly, she says the understanding wasn't that it was protection money, but rather funds for, let's say, administration within Gaza.
Right. It's clear she doesn't hold back. Does she see any of this coming? Does she issue warnings before the current conflict?
Oh, absolutely. She states very clearly that she warned repeatedly before the war started. She says believing Hamas was actually deterred was, in her words, utter stupidity, and showed a complete weakness in understanding Hamas. She makes a point of saying she's not a combatant on the ground, but sees herself as a fighter in the field of discourse, trying to shape the narrative.
That makes sense, given her outspokenness. Now, building on those internal critique, what about the relationship between the military and the political leadership? That's always a sense point.
Very sense. And she argues that too often, the military's plans seem to be driven by the general staff's own narrative, their own priorities, rather than actually executing what the political leadership directs.
You give an example?
Yeah, the specific one she mentions is the military's alleged reluctance, or maybe foot-dragging, on preparing a plan for Israel to take military control over humanitarian aid distribution in Gaza. This was despite, she claimed, political directives to do so. It suggests a real disconnect. Maybe even the military undermining the political side in her.
And that leads directly into her very provocative position on Gazan civilians and aid itself. What exactly is her take?
It's extremely uncompromising. Her direct quote is, "Any Gazan who does not evacuate to an evacuation zone is a dead man and an enemy."
Wow.
Yeah. And she connects this directly to the aid issue. She says military control over aid is essential precisely so you can differentiate civilians from combatants. She's also strongly against sending certain types of aid, like fuel or construction materials, into Gaza. And she goes further, criticizing why armed individuals seen on aid trucks aren't targeted. She even mentions Air Force Commander Tomer Bar allegedly refusing an order to act, implying there's like a military within a military.
A military within a military? That's a very serious accusation.
It is. It's an incredibly hardline stance overall.
Okay, let's pivot a bit. Because beyond the battlefield, Gotliv clearly sees major challenging insights. Internal, societal, and political issues she thinks are just as critical. How does she see the political landscape, the treatment of different figures?
Well, she perceives a real double standard. Her feeling is that politicians on the left get sort of pampered, treated with kid gloves, whereas those on the right, like herself, face constant personal attacks, mudslinging, she calls it, instead of people actually engaging with their arguments substantively. A sense of unfairness in the political discourse.
And does this feeling extend to state institutions? I know she has some very controversial the general.
Extremely controversial. She makes direct allegations against the Shin Bet's Jewish Division.
Which monitors Jewish extremism, right?
Correct. She accuses this division of actively persecuting Jewish settlers, promoting what she calls a false narrative about settler violence, and working specifically to get them placed under administrative arrest detention without trial. She even goes so far as to question why the Shin Bet as an organization should continue to exist, given what she sees as its inherent bias against the right-wing government it's supposed to serve.
Questioning its very existence. Okay. Moving from security services to recent events, what about the public protests? How does she view those? Let's start with her take on combat or peace.
Right. On this, she actually expresses a lot of empathy. She draws a parallel to her own life, mentioning she's a mother to a child with a very high disability level, 180% due to autism, which needs constant reevaluation.
Okay.
So, drawing on that experience, she argues combat veterans suffering from trauma should get immediate temporary disability status based on their doctor's or therapist's assessment. No bureaucratic hoops, no waiting. Her motto is first give, then check. She feels the system fails them right now.
That's a strong call for change there. But then what about the other major protests, the ones by the hostage families? Those have been so visible.
Her stance here is, well, she describes it as sorrowful but firm. She believes Hamas is fundamentally a murderous terror organization and simply won't return hostages willingly, period. Because of that belief, she strongly advocates for rescue operations as the primary, really the only viable path. She warns that the public pressure, the protest demanding everyone now at any cost, could actually backfire badly. It could lead to dangerous concessions, maybe even a Palestinian state, or empowering other groups like Al-Quds, making them, and this is her quote, stronger than Iran, Houthis, Hezbollah, Lebanon.
So a fear that the emotional drive could lead to strategic disaster.
That seems to be her core concern, yes.
And wrapping up the section on internal issues, what's the bigger message sending about, say, national identity?
She really hammers home the importance of Jewish identity. Your destiny is Judaism, she asserts. She believes anti-Semitism is basically a constant. It just goes under the radar sometimes when Israel appears strong. So for her, it's vital to fight against any sense of defeatism. Israel needs to maintain a ruling mentality. Her words. We are the masters of this land. It's a call for unapologetic national strength and purpose.
That call for strength, that ruling mentality, seems like a good bridge to our next area, the judicial. This is clearly another front where Gotliv has very strong, pointed opinions, especially about the Supreme Court, or Bagot.
Oh, absolutely. Her critique of the Supreme Court is sharp. She argues its progressiveness has crossed the line, that it's basically gone too far and is overstepping its authority. She points to a specific, quite high-profile case involving the dismissal of someone referred to as Mira. This case has become a real flashpoint, and Gotliv predicts the court, including a specific judge she named, Yitzhak Amit, will ultimately rule to remove Mira. But interestingly, she thinks they'll do it not out of concern for the government, but mainly to preserve the court's own standing and image.
So a sort of self-preservation move by the court, in her view?
That's her interpretation. And she also makes a procedural legal argument about why this case shouldn't even be in the Supreme Court.
Right. What's the argument there?
She argues that Mira, being a state employee, should have gone through the labor courts. That's the proper channel for employment disputes involving state workers. Gotliv points out that Mira apparently didn't attend a required hearing and essentially waived her right to one, meaning she gave up the chance to argue her case properly before a labor court judge. On top of that, Gotliv accuses Mira of leaking information and submitting legal opinions she deems unreliable. So the whole basis for the Supreme Court taking the case is flawed, according to Gotliv. It's about following the correct legal path.
It's a very detailed legal take. What I find fascinating, though, is the practical advice she gives government ministers on how to actually deal with the court. What does she tell them to do?
Her advice is pretty bold. She tells ministers to essentially stop being afraid. And maybe, surprisingly, she suggests they should represent themselves in court sometime.
Represent themselves, not rely on the state attorneys.
Exactly. She says, there is nothing better than representing yourself. Her point is that the executive branch, the government, is an elected authority, parallel to the judiciary. Judges shouldn't just dismiss ministers as, cheerleaders for the prime minister. They have their own standing. And to bolster their arguments, she suggests the government should hire respected external lawyers to provide legal opinion, make the case so strong using outside experts that it becomes much harder for the Supreme Court to just brush it aside or rule against them. It's a strategy to push back.
A strategy for asserting executive power within the legal arena. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground: military strategy, internal politics, societal issues, the judiciary. Pulling it all together, what does this deep dive into Gali Gotliv's perspective tell us about Israel right now?
Well, I think it gives you a really candid, unfiltered look from a significant political figure. You get direct insight into the kinds of internal debates happening, the strategic thinking, the core beliefs driving decision. It definitely highlights just how deep the disagreements are on fundamental issues. How the military should operate, the role of the courts, what national identity means, even how veterans should be treated. You've really heard a powerful articulation of one vision for victory, accountability, and national strength.
Yeah, and our goal here at the Deep Dive is always to help you cut through that noise, get past the headlines, and really understand the substance. Today, we've explored a viewpoint that is fundamentally uncompromising, focused on strength, on a very clear, decisive.
And maybe that leaves you, the listener, with a question to think. When you're facing these incredibly tough deep internal, where do you draw the line? How do you balance that kind of uncompromising strength that Gotliv had with maybe more pragmatic flexibility? What stands out to you about the particular balance Gotliv is trying to strike here?